still to this day, when I see the video of that wave, it's baffling. Like, it's so big and so perfect. And I almost went over the handlebars. I hit I had this really cool, huge drop. I had this big old heavy red board I was riding, and I went over the boil, this big boil, and it like slowed me down so quickly that I almost went over the handlebars, and then I regained my composure. And as soon as I did that and started bottom turning, I knew that I had made the wave, but it was like gonna barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And I bottom turned and pulled up, and it was like this, it was just dredging the whole inside bowl. It was like this overgrown sunset barrel. And it was so thick and sucking out so hard, but my board felt perfect, and I had this super wide stance. And I remember being so frothed out in the moment and having this, it was like time slowed down. And I remember like thinking, this is it. This is the wave of my life.
That's Shane Dorian. I'm Jamie Brisick. This is Soundings, brought to you by the Surfer's Journal. The Journal is a member-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Patagonia, Rainbow, Vans, and Yeti. More like a book than a magazine, the Journal delivers 136 pages of independent storytelling every 8 weeks, covering the people, culture, travel, and art of surfing. If you want to learn more, if you'd like to subscribe, please visit surfersjournal.com. 51-year-old Shane Dorian hails from Hawaii's Big Island. He was a superstar of the early 90s momentum generation. He spent about a decade on the world tour, finishing number 4 in the world in year 2000. I'll read from the Encyclopedia of Surfing. In the mid-aughts, Shane narrowed his focus to pushing the limits of paddle and performance surfing in enormous waves, especially at Maui's Jaws, a wave once thought to be impossible to ride without a jet ski. His Mavericks debut in 2010 was a revelation. Quote, Dorian did in 20 minutes what the rest of us have been trying to do at Mavericks over the last 20 years, end quote, said longtime big wave surfer Evan Slater. Shane won 6 Billabong XXL Big Wave Awards in multiple categories from 2005 to 2013. Meanwhile, he helped develop an inflatable wetsuit top capable of instantly torpedoing a trapped underwater surfer back to the surface. The invention was at least partly inspired by a near drowning Shane had at Mavericks not long after his first session there. We get into this in the podcast. Shane's appeared in a ton of surf films, most notably the Taylor Steele Momentum era offerings. He co-starred in the 1998 feature film In God's Hands. He was named as the 6th sexiest male athlete in the world in a 2002 ESPN poll. Since 1995, Shane has directed the Shane Dorian Keiki Classic for surfers 17 and under. In 2012, he was named Waterman of the Year by the Surf Industry Manufacturers Association. He lives on the Big Island with his family. His son Jackson is a hurler of giant airs on both surf and skateboard. So Shane, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you, man.
So the first time I ever saw you was, I want to say it was the 1987 or 88 Gotcha Pro, Sandy Beach, Hawaii. You were 12 or 13. You were this little spidery kid just flying along the lefts. And not only in your surfing could I see that you would go on to big things, but also just your spirit. All the guys, I was 19, 20 years old at the time. All the sort of established guys of the period would have absolutely seen it. And I remember actually talking to them about it. And so at what point did you know you wanted to be a pro surfer?
Wow, good question. You're taking us all the way back now, Jamie. That's like quite a flashback. I remember that event at Sandy Beach on Oahu, and I was like 13. I was I think I was 13 years old.
You were on an HIC.
Yeah, I was on an HIC, and I remember that was back in the day when there was I remember that event was known as I remember they had a huge bikini contest there, and like there's like the most beautiful bikini girls, and the girl who won gave me a big kiss, and I got a picture with her giving me a kiss, and it was like I remember like those were like formative moments in a kid's life, and yeah, that was epic, and that was like I was a little kid from Kona. There was no big events where I live, and no pro surfers at all where I live, and so for me to go to Honolulu and compete in a big pro contest, and Tom Curran and Derek Ho and Martin Potter and like all the big names were all there competing. That was a really huge deal for me, and that was like kind of an eye-opening thing where, for sure, that was like it just kind of like blew my mind, and it was like those moments as a kid where like you feel like you break through a glass ceiling. Like I felt like all of a sudden like possibilities emerged, and
Hmm.
I was like, wow. Like I remember like Sonny Garcia and John Shumoka and these guys that were like slightly older than me but from Hawaii. They were all like going for it, trying to be pro surfers, starting to really break through. And I was just thinking, wow, I guess I should probably pursue this.
Hmm. Yeah, it was very. It was kind of what like DIY makeshift. Like there wasn't a real established trail to get there. I mean, there was the NSSA. There were amateur contests, but it wasn't nothing like it is today, and it wasn't like necessarily financially viable.
Definitely not. Yeah, and like you said, it was especially where I lived. I mean, like I said, there were no pro surfers from the Big Island. There were no pro surfers from my hometown, which is Kona, on the Big Island, and there was just like local brothers who were surfing my home break banyans, and so like going to Oahu, like I said, and seeing like it wasn't long after that when I actually like probably the biggest thing right after that, to answer your question, when I really knew I wanted to pursue being a pro surfer. At the time, I was riding for HIC, and my shaper was a guy named Sino Megalenis, and I became really good friends with Sino's son Jason Megalenis, and we became like best friends. And he lived on the North Shore, and so he goes, "Dude, why don't you just move in with me? Like, ask your mom if you can just move to Oahu and move in with me. You can sleep on my floor, and we can go to high school together." And he talked me into this idea where I was like, I couldn't believe. I was like, that sounds totally unrealistic, and there's no chance I'm going to talk my mom into that. And long story short, I slept on it for a couple days, and then I became like hell bent on that was my idea, and I'm going home. I'm going to talk my mom into allowing me to, move to Oahu, move in with Jason and Sino, and lo and behold, I talked her into it. It was very on a lot of different conditions, a lot of which were academic and like making sure I didn't skip school and making sure I had decent grades and all that kind of thing. But yeah, that was the real time where I went from like having no clue that being a pro surfer was even possible to trying to pour everything I had into that path.
Hmm. And then obviously, like moving to the North Shore you would have had sort of role models, people who are already doing it. Probably people we both know, like Brock and Clark Little, as you mentioned, John Shamuka, Sonny Garcia. Were those guys instrumental, and did they take you under their wing?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I got really lucky. I was I was really good friends with Mags, Jason Magalanis, and became really good friends with Maddie Liu and Ross Williams. And they were part of a larger friend group with like Todd Chesser and Brock Little, John Shamoka, Sonny Garcia. And I became really close with Todd Chesser and Brock Little, who were both living at the Hill House, which was a house that our friend Ronald Hill, his parents had the house, and they basically like would allow us to all crash there, eat there, hang out there, surf in front of the house. And yeah, it was really cool. Like growing up, living at Jason Magalanis' house, going to school at Wailua High School, which is essentially in Haleiwa town. And then anytime I wasn't at school, I was surfing with Todd Chesser, Brock Little, Sonny Garcia, John Shimoka, Ross Williams, Magallanes, Matty Liu, like, and all of them had this dream of being pro surfers. And it was cool because Todd Chesser, Brock Little were like maybe 4 or 5, 6 years older than us, and they were already sort of like Brock was already in the eddy. He was already a kind of a successful young pro surfer. He had a bunch of sponsors that were paying him money. Todd Chesser had sponsors that were paying him money, and we were still in high school. And it was just cool, man. It was like that was just such a great time. Like they really did kind of take me under their wing.
Mm-hmm.
And I I was from I'm from Kona, which the waves, it's a kind of like California where I live. Like the waves are pretty small pretty much every day. And a big swell here is like a little bit overhead. And so I grew up like high performance surfing. Like I grew up surfing like head high waves. And so for me to move to the North Shore was like absolutely shocking. And surfing with those guys was mind blowing. I couldn't believe how fearless they were. Even the guys my age, like Ross Williams and Jason Magallanes, they were charging Waimea already, surfing backdoor already, surfing 10 to 12 foot Haleiwa already. And so for me, it was kind of like trial by fire. And Todd Chesser and Brock Little were like, basically, we're like, dude, you have no choice. Like, you're not going to avoid surfing big swells. Like, if you're going to hang out with us, we are taking you with us. And as soon as they did that and I showed interest, they really kind of accelerated that program where they kind of really took me under their wing. And when the waves got that next level up, like Waimea, outside reefs on the North Shore, they encouraged me to get a really big board right away. And I became, one of them.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting what you say about the waves in Kona, because that's the one thing, having watched you grow up as a surfer, you had like this rare combination of, you came up in the momentum generation, and there was a lot of kind of throwing of the tail. There was a lot of like super high performance, very kind of acrobatic surfing that doesn't always lend itself to riding massive waves. And yet you had that range. When you with Todd and Brock, who I knew both of them well, sadly both are no longer with us. Were there any great moments them sort of having you as like the young guy and going, let's do this?
Oh yeah. I mean, there was a lot of moments in the water for sure that really stuck out, and I'll get to that. But I just remember like every day when if we wake up and the waves were kind of shitty on the North Shore, and I didn't have to go to school, they'd say, "Oh, let's go to Cafe Haleiwa, like to go eat breakfast." And I'd be like, "Dude, I have no money. I'm broke. I'm just gonna like basically just eat rice." And they didn't have much money, but they had sponsors that were paying them like a little bit of money, and they were like, "Get in the truck, we're going." And I'm like, "No, man, I'm good." And they would basically like buy me breakfast every single morning, and they were like, "You're coming with us. You're coming with us. You're coming with us." And they never once like made me feel bad about it. They just always like included me in every way. Just so cool. I was just like a broke kid who didn't really know anybody, and they really included me. And I think the thing we had in common was just like that I really did love the challenge of big waves kind of right away. I kind of like went from being terrified of any challenging bigger surf to like kind of really liking to challenge myself to, manage that fear at a young age. That first winter, I really started getting into it. And then it wasn't long after that where I was surfing Waimea, really big Waimea with them. And we had a couple good big winters in a row when I was like a freshman and a sophomore in high school. And there was one day where we surfed this outer reef called Himalayas, and the waves were super huge. And it was me and Brock and Todd and Mags and Ross Williams, and we all jumped in the water to paddle out at Himalayas. And when you're paddling out there, when the waves are really big, there's kind of a shore break. There's kind of like a break that you have to get through in order to paddle out through the channel. And when you're riding like a really big board, like I think I had like a 9.6, and me and Ross and Mags were all like little kids. And so Todd and Brock got straight out, and me and me and Mags and Ross all kind of got clobbered in the inside shore break thing because we had 9.6s, so you can't really duck dive them. And I slipped through and made it out after Brock and Todd. And then I looked behind and Ross and Mags got taken in. And so like, it was like this real pivotal moment for me. Like, what do I do? Like Brock and Todd were like 100 yards out. And then my other friends were like 100 yards in. And I chose to go out with Brock and Todd. And I remember paddling out and it was just the three of us. And we got out and the waves were 25 foot, really huge, biggest waves I'd ever been in. And there was not a single person out except for the three of us. This was obviously a totally different time because now it's packed out there. And I remember being terrified, and Brock and Todd immediately caught a couple waves, and Brock caught about 3 or 4 waves in like the first 45 minutes. And then we were sitting there, and I remember a really big set was on the way, and I really wanted to, I like worshiped these guys. I really looked up to them a lot. Like to me, they were like gods in a way. Like they were like my bigger brothers, but they also like, they kind of represented like this next level of surfing that was like this almost unattainable level in my mind. I don't know. It's just kind of trippy to flash back on this, but this set was approaching. We were paddling out to it, and we went over the first wave, and the second wave was like a 20 to 25 foot left that was like sucking out on the reef. And Brock was like 6 to 8 feet further out and on the shoulder from me. And he was turning around to go, and he had already caught like 4 waves. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't caught a single wave yet. And I just went, this is it. And I whipped it, put my head down, and just went. And I was too late. It was like vertical, like a chopo drop. And I just basically grabbed my rail and airdropped on like a 25 footer and just got so flexed. And the lip hit me square as I impacted the wave, the face of the wave. The lip hit me in the back and blew out all my air. And I was truly scared right away. I knew I was in major trouble because I had no air and I was getting pummeled by this 20 to 25 foot wave. And I ran out of air, and it sounds super like cosmic, but I blacked out. I remember struggling for air and trying to swim to the top, and the second wave went over me and I was struggling for air. I was doing that thing. And that was all I remembered. And then the next thing I remembered, I remember being close to the surface and like within range of the surface and opening my eyes. And I was trying to kick and pull myself to the surface. And I felt like my legs weren't moving. Mm-hmm. It was all very weird. And I got to the surface, and it was all foam, like white foam, and there was no more waves. And I remember looking out and seeing Todd and Brock looking at me from outside, like from way outside. And I had all this foam coming out of my mouth, and I started crying like uncontrollably. And I got up on my board, and I just couldn't believe I was alive. It was so weird, such a weird experience. Even now, looking back on it, it was so strange. And yeah, long story short, I got washed all the way to shore. Brock came in about 45 minutes later. And I remember he had like this Brock was like this aloof, super cool macho man that was like no emotions. You know, he's like a boxer, and he's like fighting guys on the weekends and like charging big waves in his surf trunks. And he just never cared about anything. Like he just was the coolest. He was like as cool as it gets, you know, mm-hmm. Like. And I remember I was like on the beach, like so emotionally wrecked, and still on the beach, like crying basically. And he came up and he like sat down and like put his hand on my shoulder and just went like, man, like that was super, super heavy. And he almost died. Like that was like real. And I remember he had like this heart to heart with me, telling me that when he was younger, he had a moment like that where he thought he was invincible and that he was basically unkillable, and that he had this situation where he felt like he could have died, and it was like a big wake up call for him. and that's what that was for me. And he said, and I remember him telling me, like, the next big swell, you got to get right back on the horse, or else
Wow.
you're going to be screwed for life. And so we walked back, and I was done. And and then, yeah, about a week later, there was another swell. It was like a 20-foot swell, and the same wave was really good again. And I went back out and had a really good session with Brock and Todd and a couple other guys. And it was, yeah, I got back on the horse, and that was definitely like probably a standout story from that era of my life, like high school days with Brock and Todd. Them like taking me under their wing and making me paddle out and surf giant waves with them. It really, there's a lot of parts of me that I am now that would never have developed into who I am today without Brock and Todd.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I remember Brock had a great quote in the magazines referring to giant waves, and he said something like, "It's only water," just kind of dismissing it. What do you think it was? Obviously, like I love the thing about, and I heard the thing about Brock saying you got to get back on the horse, and the next well you got to get back out. Otherwise, if you sort of let this fear inside you fester, you won't do it again, right? But what do you think it was? Was it something like innate in your personality? Was it genetic in your family? I think your father was a stuntman of some kind, an actor.
He was not an actor. He was he did do stunts. He was a kind of a trippy dude. He raced MGs, those little cars, back in the day, like in LA. And then he did stunts. So he did stunts for a bunch of Elvis movies. So
Oh
he
wow,
was Elvis's stunt double because Elvis couldn't swim. So like in Blue Hawaii and some of those other Elvis Hawaii films, which there was a bunch of them. He did all the swimming for that and some other stunts.
incredible, Shane. So okay, so there's your father, but another kid would have had that wipeout and just gone, nope, I'm done. Don't need any more of that. That like scared me so bad. I don't ever want to experience that again. What do you think it was that kept you coming back?
The challenge, man. I loved it. I honestly like I didn't love I never got into big waves like the 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 possibility of dying or trying to get close to death and not dying. That was never like it was never the danger element. I was never like this is dangerous. I'm attracted to it. It
Hmm.
was more the fear aspect was the like the challenge of suppressing the fear and the
Hmm.
challenge of managing the fear was the thing. That for sure was I was like obsessed with it. I
Hmm.
was obsessed with trying to maintain my breath and trying to keep my cool and keep a level head in intense situations. I always thought that was just really interesting to try to do that,
Yeah,
even when I was really young.
interesting. Having spent time with both Brock and Todd Chesser, Brock Little, Todd Chesser, like they were good friends when I was growing up as well. And I couldn't keep up with them, just to be clear. But the one thing I do remember about both of them is they had that kind of adrenaline junkie thing where like they thrived on those crazy challenges. And I know you just mentioned with Brock, he was boxing. I remember there was like going to that one bridge that he would jump off at night into the like dark river below. I remember with Todd and I, we traveled around the world with rent-a-cars. He was really into driving fast and pulling like massive handbrake slides. There were all these things that were just sort of pushing to the edge of like fear and danger, I guess. Were you like that as well?
Yes, I was, but I became exposed to a whole new level of it with those two. Like I think I had that in me, kind of in my maybe in my DNA, or I liked I liked taking risks when I was even really young before I had met those two. But it wasn't until I moved over there and where I became kind of like their little brother
Hmm.
when I those guys, I being around them and being exposed to their antics and how like what they got off on and how risky they were and what they were into. Like Brock thought nothing of going and getting drunk and like fighting like four guys at once. Like that was like a real thing. Like
Hmm.
and he would come back like all punched out and I sometimes I'd like drive him home and he was like bleeding and he thought it was a lot of fun and I remember just being like wow these guys their capacity for risk,
Mm-hmm.
their ability to like normalize situations that were so intense was like baffling. And
Yeah.
I was really attracted to it, like on a like a little brother type of way. Like, wow, like these, it made them even larger than life to me. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that rubbed off on me in a way I never was. I didn't. I wasn't like attracted to to some of the things that they were into as far as like risks go, but I definitely they. I guess they just, you know, like the evolution of myself was influenced by them a lot for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm. In terms of big wave surfing, is there a kind of peak moment that you experience? Is there a particular wave? Is there a particular session that stands out in your mind as like it all coming together in that one thing?
You know, I'm lucky enough to say that I've had quite a few of those where I felt really like in the zone and really like, you know, just kind of at the apex of your ability.
Mm-hmm.
And we all feel like that at some session in our lives. Like I feel like all surfers kind of have that in common, where you get these moments where a wave will like challenge you to the very extent of your abilities. And yeah, I mean, for sure at Piahi on Maui, I've had sessions out there. There was one that there was one that stands out. It was like the end of October, I think, in 2012, and it was really early in like the Jaws paddle days, and it was like I remember it was like kind of small in the morning, and it was supposed to come up all afternoon, and it was very glassy for Jaws, and it was like I was with Ian Walsh, Billy Kemper, Greg Long, a whole group of us really. Kai Lenny was there. The Walsh twins were there. Just like a whole group of people. Kiala Kennelly, Paige Alms, a whole group of us. But it was like this super session early in the winter, and it was just epic Jaws. It went from like kind of 10 to 12 foot, barely breaking and glassy, and all of a sudden it started flexing 20 feet. And then before dark, it was like solid 25 feet and glassy. And I got one wave. There was like this really big set. We had a bunch of really good waves, and everyone surfed really good that day. There was some real standout waves that day that were like real breakthrough type paddle waves at the time. And this one really big set came in after I'd caught a wave, luckily, and it washed through and washed almost everybody in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only about 45 minutes before dark. So all those people who got washed in, they broke their boards, broke their leashes, and they were either like in boats leaving because it was like going to get dark soon, or they had already gone in like up the cliff. And a set came in, and there was only two of us out. It was only Mark Healy, and he was paddling back from the lefts, back to the rights on that very outside of the break. And I was by myself on the rights. And this huge set came in, which was like terrifying because I had just paddled back out during that huge set that washed everyone in. And it was like 25 foot and barreling, like perfect barrels. And I remember I knew I was in the spot. I was like, oh my God, I'm in the spot. And there's like a 25-foot set coming in. And Mark was paddling around from the lefts. And it was just the two of us. And it just seemed like the hugest football field of area to like try to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just going like, if it's a good one and I'm in the spot, I have to go. Because the waves were so good. It was so glassy and so rare for Jaws. And this wave came in and it was so big. And I remember thinking I was too far out. And as soon as I saw it, I turned around and put my head down and went, I'm going to just try to put my head down. I'm going to try to give it all I got. And if it gives me the green light, I'm going no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I was in the spot. And it did. It gave me the green light. And I've always been a little bit like that, where if the wave looked right, I would try my absolute hardest, like put myself in the spot. And if the wave wanted me to catch it, then it did. Then I wouldn't ask any questions, and I felt like I kind of had to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that wave did that. I felt like it gave me the green light. It was really huge and really scary. And I remember thinking like, if I fall, it's going to be really, really bad. But it just was just a perfect wave. Still to this day, when I see the video of that wave, it's baffling. Like it's so big and so perfect. And almost went over the handlebars. I hit the I had this really cool huge drop. Had this big old heavy red board I was riding, and I went over the boil, this big boil, and it like slowed me down so quickly that I almost went over the handlebars, and then I regained my composure. And as soon as I did that and started bottom turning, I knew that I had made the wave, but it was like gonna barrel.
Mhm.
And I bottom turned and pulled up, and it was like this. It was just dredging the whole inside bowl. It was like this overgrown sunset barrel, and it was so thick and sucking out so hard. But my board felt perfect, and I had this super wide stance. And I remember being so frothed out in the moment and having this. It was like time slowed down, and I remember like thinking, "This is it. This is the wave of my life. This is it." Like as I was riding it, I was thinking, "This is the wave of my life. This is the pinnacle of my surfing right here." Like it was. I felt like every cell in my body was like activated at the highest level in order for me to ride that wave successfully. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, I'm right with you.
That sounds
That's
so cheesy, but
no, it doesn't at all, actually. I have a question. When you say the wave gives me the green light, what does that mean?
well, I didn't feel green lights when I saw it, but when you paddle for a wave, it either allows you to catch it or it doesn't. Even
Right.
even a small wave, right?
Just that momentum, yes.
Yeah, and like a really big wave, you're the spot that you have to be, the physical spot
Hmm.
that you have to be on a really giant technical wave gets so tiny and so precise. It's almost microscopic. It feels like it's microscopic when you're in that spot. And when
Wow.
you're not, especially when you're not in that spot,
So it
you
goes
be
from like,
1 foot away from that spot and it's red lights.
yes, I totally
And
get you now. Now I know exactly. I love that you described the football field because I can really see that. And I've felt versions of that surfing Sunset Beach, which has that, and even Himalayas, which
yeah.
has that thing where
Mhm.
there's like, it's a massive lineup. The wave's not
Mhm.
necessarily like capping over this exact spot all the time.
Yeah.
Um, but wait, so what length board are you paddling into this wave?
Does
How
a
long?
10-6.
Okay. And you're just, your feet, you're basically like head down, paddling as hard as you can. And you feel this thing. It's like a sixth sense of like, this is the one.
Yeah. I knew it was the one. I knew that was going to be the wave of my life as soon as I saw it. It was just so big and so perfect. It looked like a 25-foot backdoor wave, and it was glassy, which
Wow.
is like at Jaws never happens. And yeah, I mean, there's just looking back on it, like guys have caught waves that were probably better than that now, but like it was so a long time ago now, and it just had that feeling. And I'm sure if you ask like Kai Lanny or Billy Kemper or Ian Walsh, they have like that pinnacle moment at Jaws or on a really, really big wave where like for a moment, for like a 5-second period, they were like up on this like razor blade where they were like balancing perfectly. It sounds super weird, but like as soon as the wave was over, I remember I was like the pinnacle, that moment, that pinnacle moment. It was like that unattainable moment in surfing life that happened was in the rearview mirror,
Hmm.
and it was gone. Poof, it was gone.
Wow.
And it had happened, and I was super aware that that moment was like the best surfing moment of my life.
Uh-huh.
But then it was in the rearview. As soon as I like got basically spit out and was sitting on my board, I was like, it was almost like this crazy come down of emotion, like this this adrenaline dump of like, oh my gosh, that's over now. Like I was like so happy, but somehow I was like, it was like this weird little depression that was over.
Hmm.
I don't know how to explain that. It was super weird, but yeah, surfing is so cool. But I think I'm definitely far from the only person who's ever felt like that. But like that intense, like, wow, like I just surfed as good as I can surf. Like
Hmm.
I'm sure you've had waves like that, and everyone listening to this show has probably had those waves where you're like where you shock yourself
Yeah.
of like, holy shit, I just surfed as good as I could surf on the wave of my life. And it's a good feeling, man. It's like those moments, and some are more intense than others, but they're like unforgettable, you know?
No, you describe it so well, and the every cell of your body being kind of heightened and awakened. Is there a come down when you have like when you surf giant waves? Do you have like a depression afterwards?
Yeah. The whole next day, I feel like I'm hungover. It sounds weird, but like it's and some of it is probably physical, you know. and I think some of it is like psychological, but I'm always like very well aware of that. Like I'm always like hydrating and like taking a lot of vitamins that night, because the next day I don't feel like shit, but you just feel drained. Like it takes so much effort and energy. Yeah, man. And you see it. Like if you watch like that wave of Twiggy at Jaws, or some of Billy Kemper's waves or Kai Lenny's waves, like the amount of heart and soul you have to pour into that moment is
Mhm.
draining, dude.
Yeah.
It's draining. Like it takes every last cell in your being to like pour into that moment. And so the next day it is like there's a come down for sure for me. I feel like tired all day. Like I just want to like loaf around and eat.
Yeah.
But it is,
Interesting.
it's cool.
When you talk about that, it calls to mind there. Having like observed big wave surfers for a lot of years. To my mind, there's sort of a spectrum with extremes, and on one end of of that spectrum is being very calculated, being very precise with your training, your diet, etc. And then the other extreme would be like the adrenaline junkie that's maybe not maybe more pushing to the edges of fear and learning to manage the fear more so. And I think of Ross Clark Jones, who we know. And Ross is like not a real by the book training sort of guy, but you put him behind the wheel of a car and it's almost like there's a training going on in every waking moment where he's just playing the edge. What has served you well in terms of like how to prepare, right? Because with just to clarify, and I think most of our listeners know this, but like riding waves of that sort, they're not there every day. It's not like a day-to-day kind of training that we might see with the WSL surfers. There's a lot of times off season where you're kind of waiting for that. And so what has been good for you in terms of staying in that zone?
Yeah, it's a great question. And like you said, like you kind of have to stay ready. You kind of just have to be ready all the time. And like that that wave that wave that I was just talking about, that day I was just talking about, that was in think about it, that was in 2012. And there's been huge perfect days since then and rides that were like super exceptional for me personally since then. But those days and those rides and those opportunities, they don't come around often. It might be 3 or 4 years before you get a great opportunity at a really epic wave at Jaws. Really, actually, like 4 or 5 years. Like that's not unrealistic. So to stay ready year after year, month after month, day after day for that potential one day is not easy. Like mentally, physically, psychologically ready. And if you have like phlegm in your lungs, or you have a head cold, or you have a tweaked knee or something, like that wave that you want to get, you're not going to get it. You're not going to
Mhm.
ride that wave on that day if you're not totally ready. And so for me, the way to stay totally ready psychologically was to be super ready physically. And so while I was, and let's be clear, like what I'm talking about is pretty much in my it is in my rear view mirror now. Like I'm 51. Those days are behind me where I'm chasing giant waves at Jaws and all excited about that. But for me, when I was really into that, in order for me to feel psychologically totally ready, I had to be physically like in great shape for myself to feel like just out of like the simple being responsible
Mhm.
out there, just feeling like I did the work, I deserve the opportunity. And so I was just trying to be really physically fit. And so I would train super hard. I was swimming a ton. I was doing breath training. I was like lifting weights, doing CrossFit, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I was probably overtraining for about 8 years, but it
Hmm.
was because I felt like if I was hard as nails in every way, that when that wave showed itself, I would whip it and go. It's just
Mhm.
that simple.
Yep. Yep, yep. What about the part of, chasing swells around the world where you're, looking at swell forecasting, meteorological stuff? Were you active in that as well?
I was, and I learned a lot from guys like Greg Long was really on it. Ian Walsh was really on it, and I spent a lot of time with those two. And then Surfline was always really, really good with just being super helpful. They're forecasters. I could reach out to them anytime. and they would give me like detailed breakdowns. But I wasn't nearly as good. I would kind of rely on other people. I would call Greg, and I would call Ian for Jaws especially, and I would call Greg for even Jaws. He was so on it. And then like for like Mavericks and stuff like that, I would always call Greg and Twiggy, because they would have like a database written down basically in journals of like swell heights, swell directions, swell periods, wind heights, like what everything was happening with Jaws for like all the best swells for like the last 5 years. And then they could sort of back test what was forecast now with like the days in the past that kind of had those same numbers. So it'd give you a much better idea of kind of what to expect as a swell was approaching. And then I was my theory on big wave surfing is like, I never wanted to surf 50 big days a year. I didn't want to be on every swell. I didn't want to be on a plane chasing every single big swell. I didn't want to go to Jaws every single time it broke. I was more like trying to cherry pick the best days, the best waves, and make the reward worth the risk. You know? And so for me, my theory was like, unless it's an 8 out of a 10 or better in size, and unless it's an 8 out of a 10 or better in conditions, I'm not going to consider it. And so that was always my thing. So like if a swell was on the way, I would call, you know, Kevin Wallace at Surfline, or one of the lead forecasters at Surfline, and say, they would give me all the numbers and like all the technical stuff about the fetch and how far away the storm was. And I'm like, okay, let's forget about that. Is it going to be an 8 out of 10 size wise? And if so, is it going to be an 8 out of a 10 conditions wise? And if yes, it was yes to both questions, then I was going, you know?
Interesting. The tracking of swells, and you and I have talked about this before, but the tracking of swells parallels hunting, which is another thing that you've been very passionate about, right?
Yeah.
Are they similar? What's the draw? Are you still hunting a lot?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with bow hunting. Yeah, they have their similarities for sure. The patience, the patience is the biggest one. Like if you love to surf big waves and you want to get that wave that you see Billy Kemper on, you have to be super patient and level-headed and be able to pass up a lot of shitty waves, a lot of shitty days, and just have a lot of patience with your eye on the bigger picture. And I think that surfing big waves really taught me that. And I developed that skill over time. Like when I was a kid, I had really intense ADHD, and I was like pretty hyperactive, and I was pretty darn impatient. And through surfing, and especially big wave surfing, I became a much more patient person. And then if I wasn't already patient enough, becoming a bow hunter definitely is an exercise in patience all the time.
What about so you described kind of an apex wave in your big wave surfing career. What about worst wipeout? Was there any that really terrified you?
There were two. There was the one I said before that was at Himalayas with Brock and Todd Chesser, where I blacked out and I was held underwater for 2 waves. And then I had another really, really scary one at Mavericks years later, 2010. I went on a really big wave. It was a really giant day at Mavericks, and I ate shit on a really big wave. Went over the handlebars, got sucked over the falls, held underwater for 2 waves, nearly drowned, didn't black out, but like nearly drowned. Like felt like it was as close as it could have got. Had a really horrible concussion for 2 days. And it was because of that wipeout that I had to like kind of take a hard look. It was right after I had my son, and my daughter was a baby still. And I had, you know, in my mind, all of a sudden I felt like I had a whole lot to lose because I had a family. And I nearly died, and I felt like it was really irresponsible to go surfing and nearly die when you have children, or even more irresponsible to die when you have children. And so I just felt like I was like tripping out, like, you know, how can I justify keep making these seemingly selfish decisions, going on these big waves and going on these big swells, And it was at that point, it was actually right after that wipeout that I came up with the idea to have an inflatable device in my wetsuit.
Hmm. I remember talking to you about this some years back, and if I remember correctly, didn't you say like in the middle of the hold down, your family sort of flashed before your eyes?
Yeah, my son.
It's so
Yeah.
interesting. I've heard that. I've heard other people say the same thing in like near death experiences. Suddenly, sort of the family emerging in their minds, which is so. It seems so. It seems like in the kind of ragdolling of like being under a massive wave at Mavericks and being held under for that long. It seems like an odd thing. I mean, it's an obvious thing on the one hand, but also like an odd thing to emerge in your mind.
Yeah, and I don't think that emerges until it's really bad. Do you know what I mean? I never had those. I never, like, when I get pounded by a big wave, I don't visualize my family ever. It doesn't happen. I'm like trying to like manage my fear and trying to like keep my heart rate low. It wasn't until like I think your mind almost gives in to where you feel like you're powerless over the wipeout and you just, this could be it. Is I
Mhm.
think that's the trigger, is like this could be it, is when your mind gives way into that. And it's really terrifying, to be honest. Like that only happened to me once in my life, where I was involuntarily seeing like this imagery of my wife and my son, and it was terrifying
Mm.
because I just felt like I couldn't do, I had no power, I had no control over the situation, and that if this wave wanted to kill me, this was, I was gonna die a watery death at Mavericks, and
Mhm.
I really didn't want to do that. And you know, when you get on a flight to go to Mavericks, you're not thinking, oh, I could die right now. You're thinking, oh, how much fun am I gonna have? The waves are gonna be huge. I'm gonna be with my friends. I'm gonna get the wave of my life. You're thinking all these like selfish thoughts about how much fun it's all gonna be. And then next thing you know, you're at the bottom of the ocean in freezing cold kelp water.
Mhm.
And you're
Yeah.
like, this is not the way I want to go, you know?
Yep. 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 Um, when you reflect on your career, what are you most proud of? What comes up as the thing that was the best, the greatest?
Probably two things. If I had to narrow it down to only two, I would say the first thing would be I was never the kid that was supposed to make it. I was never, I didn't have any sort of like amateur career. I wasn't like winning national titles. I didn't have all the right sponsors. I wasn't like the kid everybody knew about. I was really like never the kid. I never even really believed in myself when I was a kid. Like I never thought I had the ability or the talent to make it as a pro surfer. And I think the fact that I overcame that and overachieved through like just straight up like grinding my way up is probably the thing I'm most proud of,
Mhm.
for sure.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I think is a couple things. I think that I gave it my all with the big waves. When I look back, there's nothing I left on the table.
Mhm.
I feel like I had like a chapter surfing like Jaws and Mavericks where I was like really focused and really like I don't like feel like I left anything on the table. I feel like I really gave it my all. And then the other thing I'm really proud of is that when I was felt like I should be done, I walked away from it
Mhm.
with no questions asked, you know.
Yeah.
I never wanted to be that old guy who is still out there and everybody knows he probably shouldn't be doing this and stuff like that.
Well, it's so interesting because I think we've all seen this where like surfing begins as this like frolicking in the ocean in the most joyful possible way, and then you definitely see old surfers who become bitter, you know, and it can become the antithesis of why we started. And so yeah, that relationship, I think that's like one of the themes that I'm always trying to explore through these podcasts and writing about surfing for many years is you know, what do you do? What does the aging surfer do? Like, what is the good life for someone that's loved surfing? Is it, do you hang on to it tightly? Do you let go of it? Do you only do it part time? You know, like, where does surfing fit into your life now?
Great question. And I think I'm in a little bit of a unique position to answer it just because of my experience is different than other people's, you know, I get to ask this question all the time because I have had like these really crazy high highs of like surfing giant jaws and nearly dying and like having this like world tour experience and all these years of like really intense surfing situations. And I really am proud to report that I love to surf still.
Mm-hmm.
And I go on trips with my kid to surf the points in southern Mexico, and it's shoulder high, and I'm just having a blast on my twin fin, and I'm totally happy riding shoulder high waves that are like soft and fun. And I go surfing with my daughter. I just went to Indo with my kid and surf really fun waves in Indo. Like I love to surf. I love watching the sunrise from out in the water. I love riding waves, even when they're shitty. I like just the experience of being a surfer and riding waves is just so good for your soul. And I feel like it keeps you happy and keeps you young.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I'm in my 50s now and I love surfing. I really do. I don't surf probably as much as I did when I was like in my 20s, obviously, or my 30s, but surfing still has a huge place in my heart for sure.
Mm-hmm. And is it more fun and playful now, or do you have to be careful of your ego? Like, is there a part of you that sort of feels like you have something to prove still, or are you able to just sort of step back from it?
I think I'm doing a pretty good job of managing the ego.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of egotistical saying that. But no, like I have no problem. Like I'll fly to Mexico during a huge swell and all these guys will be going to Puerto with their big board bags and I'll be going to Salina Cruz with my 5'8".
Yeah.
And it's funny, right? That's like kind of a funny thing. And they're like, "You going to Puerto? It's going to be huge." And I'm like, "No, I'm going to go surf like shoulder high waves."
Right.
And I'm happy about that.
Mm-hmm.
I really am. And it makes it, so yeah, I'm fine with like passing up the big waves and passing up the intensity. I do still feel like I surf good enough to rise to the occasion in certain situations. Like last year when like pipe and backdoor were good, I paddled out there. I got like new boards from like Wade to Coral that were like 7.0s and 7.2s. And I still got some really killer John Carpers that I ride. And I'll paddle out to pipe and backdoor. And even though it's packed with like all these crazy, high level, like young guys who are breathing fire, I love paddling out there still and saying hi to the boys and trying to snag one or two. And I still love that feeling of getting blown out of a barrel at pipe and backdoor for sure. So I'm not done with that yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What is a typical day like for you? How do your days go?
That's a good question. I mean, it's real different because I travel quite a bit more than I ever thought I would. Partially because my son, he's 16 and he's kind of a pro surfer these days, and so because he's 16, I do a lot of traveling with him, and my wife does as well, and we'll kind of take turns because I have a daughter as well. So I travel with him a lot. Like I would say probably 5 to 6 months a year I'm away from home with him, and then I'm way even more than that otherwise. But so it's always different. Like I was just traveling for like 3 months straight, and basically every day my day was like, it's very simple. Like I kind of like a pro surfer still, where wake up, have breakfast, check the waves, surf, like train, go to the gym, surf, and then make sure like my business was taken care of, like do my computer work and do the stuff I need to do that isn't surfing.
Mm-hmm. Tell me
Pretty
more.
simple though, really.
Yep. Your son is Jackson, and tell me a little bit. What's it like for you as a father watching your kid sort of follow in your footsteps?
It's weird. It is. It's surreal in so many ways, and I definitely didn't see it coming. Funnily enough, when he was young, of course I wanted him to be a surfer. Like just like everybody does. Everybody who surfs wants their kid to be a surfer because surfing is so fun and had such a great impact on all of our lives. Of course, you'd want to share that with them. And I I so wanted my son to fall in love with surfing. That way he had it for the rest of his life, just as a surfer, be able to go on surf trips with his buddies and, whatever he chose in his life, just to love surfing. And same with my daughter. I really wanted her to do that. So, um, just to have that experience and be a surfer is amazing. It's such a gift when you fall in love with surfing. And then he found skateboarding when he was like, I don't know, 7 or something. And he became totally obsessed with skateboarding for about 3 years and basically didn't surf at all. Only wanted to go to the skate park. And he like refused to go to the beach. And then luckily, just organically, he got back into surfing and his friends started surfing and his friends weren't at the skate park anymore. And so he fell in love with surfing and yeah, it happened in a really cool way. And he has a great relationship with surfing, which I love that. And he's made tons of friends from surfing and got a lot of travel opportunities from surfing, much like I did when I was a kid. And it's something that we can bond over as well. We get to travel a ton and like, you don't get those years back. Like when your kid is 12, 13, 15, 16, like those are like that chapter I'm going to remember forever.
Yeah.
When I'm 90 years old, I'm not going to regret a single surf trip I went on with my kids.
Yep.
So I'm trying to lap it up and make the most of it.
Yep. Do you coach him?
Yes and no. He likes surfing comps. He's kind of really into surfing comps. And I don't coach him in comps at all. Like I try to get him to either work with different coaches in different places and kind of like learn from them. But nobody wants to hear from their dad pretty much. I don't think, and I understand that. I expect that. I would think it was weird if he wanted me to coach him, in contests, but he does ask me to go over his clips with him all the time. And he knows I know what I'm talking about from like a fundamental perspective. And like every other kid who surfs good, he wants to get better.
Yep. And here's a strange question for you, Shane. At this stage of life, who are your heroes? Who do you look up to?
Oh, good question. Oh man.
Or maybe even what do you look up to? Like where do you derive your inspiration?
It's changed so much, right? Like when you're at different ages, like that was a really easy question to answer when I was in my 20s. It'd be like, you sports heroes or someone who like became wildly successful financially or whatever. And now I'm 51 and I'm like entering this totally different chapter of sort of being like semi-retired. My kids are growing up. I'm starting to look at what life is going to be like when I'm retired. And like now it's like I really look up to I have a couple of friends who are 10 to 15 years older than me who have really successful marriages. They still love their wife. Their wife loves them. They have these great relationships. They're retired. Their kids are grown and their kids are amazing people. And man, they just like, they get to this like late chapter in life and they kind of killed it. And that's who I look up to, of course, right? You want to, that's, of course you want to, I aspire to get to that later chapter. And I'm trying to do that work now, right? I'm trying to do that work now that I'm 50. I'm like, okay, when I'm 60, when I'm 70, when I'm 80, like, where do I want to be? And so I'm trying to do the work with my wife, which I'm really lucky. I have an amazing wife and we still love each other and love spending time together. And so now we're talking about like, what does life look like when our kids are gone, which is only like about 4 years away from now. So we're looking at the next chapter and excited about that. And yeah, I mean, it's things just evolve as you get older, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I doubt your listeners want to hear that, but
no, but I do find it interesting. And in many decades of a life, you strike me as someone who's always been true to themselves and seen the long game.
Yeah, I mean, like looking back on it, it definitely looks like that from outside. But I was actually talking to my wife about this last night. Like, life is like a series of choices that you make that have such serious implications, and you don't really realize the path that all those choices are taking you down.
Yeah.
Until you're there.
Yes.
And it really is delicate.
It is.
You can mess it up so easily. And there was a couple of choices I made that I really was unsure about in the moment, and they ended up working out really well. you know, just life, the path of life is wild.
Yeah.
And I definitely haven't made all the good decisions. That's for sure. But yeah, I feel like I've been true to myself and what I really want in life, and tried to work really hard at, making those things happen. And now I'm trying to like set the example for my children to kind of show them those values, and hope that they can be 51 one day and look back and go, wow, this is like a really fun time I've had. This is awesome.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Shane. And great talking to you.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Soundings is produced by me, Jamie Brisick, and Jonathan Shiflett. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Our theme song is Give Me a Wave by Oscar Matsumiya and Poslin Chanton. Soundings is brought to you by the Surfer's Journal, a reader-supported publication, made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Patagonia, Rainbow, Vans, and Yeti. The journal is published bi-monthly. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to visit surfersjournal.com and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening to Soundings. We appreciate you, and until next time.